Can you please take your seats? We are about to start. We are lucky enough to have our hosts and everyone in the room almost. We are being told that a few colleagues are still about to join us, but we are going to make it a start. Thank you. It's great to see such an enthusiasm at the very start of today's event. Normally it's at the end that everybody networks, but don't worry, you will have further opportunity to do that when the meeting finishes. So my name is Frédéric Destrebec. I'm the Executive Director of the European Brain Council. I will be your moderator today. But more importantly, I would like to give the floor to our host, MEP Tilly Metz. Tilly is a very strong defender of the cause of mental health since all the years that she has passed in this house. And we are very pleased and thankful for her to host us today. So Tilly, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And indeed, it's great to see so many people in the room, but I've heard also there are more than 300 online. So I'm very happy to welcome everybody for this great interest in the psychedelic care. So it's really a privilege to welcome you all in the European Parliament for the launch of this European Citizens Initiative for Psychedelic Care. So together with my colleague, MEP Tomislav Sokol, I'm humbled by the remarkable presence, as I said already, of so many also dedicated experts, policymakers, patient advocates, and civil society representatives here today. Mental health, as already said, is one of the defining health challenges of our time. So depression, but also post-traumatic stress disorders, anxiety disorders, and addiction impact millions of lives across Europe, often leaving patients with limited treatment options. So unfortunately, many of these individuals face persistent suffering due to the inadequacies that they face and of the existing therapies that are there today. However, we are now in a transformative moment. In recent years, we have witnessed what many have called the psychedelic renaissance, where these substances have emerged really as potential game changers in medical treatments. The UN World Drug Report of 2023 notably acknowledges this shift, recognizing not only the traditional spiritual and recreational uses of psychedelics, but also their newfound potential for addressing certain psychiatric conditions such as depression, drug and alcohol addiction. Emerging research demonstrates that psychedelic-assisted therapies have the potential to offer really groundbreaking treatments, achieving outcomes that were previously thought impossible. These therapies, when administered in safe, structured environments, may really open doors to new levels of healing for those struggling with severe mental health challenges. So as our understanding of psychedelic deepens, it becomes increasingly evident that they could revolutionize really the mental health care. However, as with any medical intervention, it is crucial to approach the use of psychedelics with caution and a solid foundation of scientific evidence. This is why I am so pleased to see the launch of this Psychedelic Care, an initiative backed really by scientists, medical doctors, therapists, neuroscience researchers, policy experts, human and civil rights activists, also, yes, spiritual practitioners and educators. The importance of this European Citizens Initiative cannot be overstated. I hope that by raising awareness, this initiative will bring the urgent need for better regulation and broader access to psychedelic-assisted therapies to the forefront of European policy discussion. It is heartening to know that this event not only marks the beginning of an important advocacy journey, but also provides a platform to highlight the lived experience of patients. Their voices are at the core of this movement, reminding us why this work matters so much. So I'm confident that today's discussion will set a strong foundation for future collaboration, innovation, and progress. So as a member of the European Parliament, I will continue to support this initiative and advocate for more EU action towards fostering research, innovation, and regulatory frameworks that embrace new solutions for mental health care. I wish really the PsychedeliCare initiative every success. So thank you once again for being here today and for your dedication to this important cause. So I look forward to fruitful and also inspiring discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tilly, and thanks again for hosting us today. As a co-host, we have one of your colleagues, also a very strong health advocate within the House, Tomislav Sokol. Tomislav, you've been shadow rapporteur on the issue of the pharma legislation. You were also in charge of the European health data space as, let's say, two key topics or landmarks, but there were many others. So thank you for being here today as well, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for reaching out first to be able to co-host this event. This is one of the biggest events in terms of the number of you in the audience that it had in a while here in the Parliament, and we have a lot of events going on healthcare. So this definitely shows how an important topic this is. Obviously, it will be very hard to be original after Tilly because she covered, I think, everything important. But I would like to focus on what actually EU can do, and I think that's most important, to be as concrete as possible. So what I think is important is that here we actually are speaking about two issues which have become priorities in the last years. One is mental health, and mental health has become one of the most important topics here in the Parliament, especially after COVID-19, when we realized how many issues it caused, especially with young people, and that this is something that definitely needs to be done. When we see the data, we see the figures, especially of mental health issues, number of suicides, etc., of young people, which I think is the second cause of death now for people aged 15 to 19. Definitely, it shows us that we have to do something, and that we have to do much more than we've been doing up until now. The second point is research. So research innovation has become one of the important topics, and the main priority here is how to make Europe center of top biotech research innovation now in this global world. We see what's going on. We see that that we are lagging behind. We are lagging behind the US. So this different the difference between us and the US is growing. So US is definitely advancing more in terms of its share of research innovation, and the distance between us and China is shrinking. So definitely Europe is losing pace. Europe is losing its position as one of the global centers of medical research, and this is something that we definitely need to change. Especially in the geopolitical context that we are seeing with the new US administration, we definitely have a sense that we have to be as autonomous and less dependent on others as possible in terms of especially production of new medicines and top medical innovation. So this is a great initiative. Because we are speaking about something which is really groundbreaking, something that is bringing something new. Also, I think this will help bring down some taboos which still probably exist. And definitely clinical research shows that this has potential. And I think this is important. I think this is something that can really make a difference, which can really be a game changer. And this is something that EU needs to fully support. As you know, healthcare is primarily a national competence, so member states decide what they will fund, which medicines, which health treatments, etc. But EU has a role to play in terms of approving new medicines to be put on the European market. This is done for many medicines through the centralized procedure through European Medicines Agency, and also to the regulation that Frederic mentioned that we are still working on, and that is the pharmaceutical legislation, which regulates the conditions how medicines can be put on the market. So what procedure, in what time these decisions have to be made, and also in what way we can stimulate new innovation and groundbreaking research in Europe. So I think when we speak about pharma legislation, so the parliament has defined its first reading position. Now we are waiting for the council, the member states. But I think two things are important. So first, that we'll cut the time for approval of new medicines without jeopardizing safety and efficiency. So that's the idea, that medicines are approved much faster than they are today. Because if you compare us, again, with the US, you see that new medicines are approved there much faster than in Europe. But of course, without jeopardizing safety and efficiency. And I think this can be done by cutting red tape, by making procedures simpler and easier. So this is the first thing. And the second thing, obviously, how to provide incentives for investments into new medicines in Europe. So into medicines, into clinical research, into clinical trials, which I think are a big problem. If you look at the map of clinical trials, you see that they are centered in a few big member states, while some smaller member states like mine are definitely lagging behind there within Europe. And this is also something that we need to change. So we are waiting for the council to define their common position, hopefully in several months, and then we start negotiations with them. But the most important thing is to provide incentives for investments in new medicines, in new clinical trials in Europe, but also that they are spread evenly across Europe, that all European patients can benefit from it. So this initiative is extremely important. It's kind of in the link between brain health treatment and mental health treatment. I think this is very important. I think these two things cannot be seen in isolation, one from the other. I think this is deeply connected. And this is why I've been advocating here in the parliament as well, to have also some kind of institutional framework to organize MEPs around these two important topics. Because I think that we cannot discuss mental health without the actual investments into research, into brain health, into innovation, into providing new medicines, etc. So psychedelic care definitely has a lot of potential. This is serious. I know I've done my homework. I know that there is a lot of research, clinical research going on, that there are serious players involved. And I hope and that we will also be able, by providing a clearer and better regulatory framework, to make it easier that these new medicines, if they fulfill all the requirements, if they go through all phases of clinical trials, will be able in the end, clinical studies will be able to get to the European patients. So I support this initiative. I'm glad that this is gaining momentum, that we have a European citizens initiative on this topic, and I can see again from the interest and the number of you here in the room how important this is. So I'm glad that I was able to be one of the co-hosts with Tilly on this matter. I think this shows us that healthcare transcends political differences between political groups. Having EPP and the Greens sitting together, I think that's definitely promising. That doesn't happen quite often, but this shows how an important topic this is. And I can definitely promise you that I will continue to fight that healthcare gains more focus in the European Parliament, that it remains one of the most important policy issues in Brussels, because we are losing the momentum a bit. Some other topics are taking over, and we have to fight against that. And I continue also. I look forward to working with you to bring top groundbreaking medical innovation into Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomislav. And I'd like to pick up on the word that you alluded to, which is the sense of unity in a topic like the one of today. I think that the demonstration on how to address an issue like mental health or brain health, as you said, it being the first cause of disability and the second cause of mortality in the EU, has really no political barriers. And this is translated also in the support that we received from other MEPs, some who are in the room, such as MEP Bogdan Zdrojewski. So very much welcome. Please feel free. Please feel free to ask for the floor if there is any comment that you would like to provide. But we also have MEPs who are not in the room having expressed support, amongst others, Alex Saliba, Romana Jerkovic, and Vytenis Andrukaitis. But we also have quite a few accredited assistants with us in the room. So please be welcome, and feel free also to be in touch if there is anything you'd like to ask during or after the event. I'm also sitting here on behalf of PAREA. I'm a PAREA board member, and I would like to give a short introduction on behalf of our chair, who could not be with us for health reasons, Professor David Nutt, who unfortunately broke a leg a couple of days ago and was not able to travel. But so PAREA, we stand for the Psychedelic Access and Research European Alliance. We gather patient organizations, clinical, scientific societies, advocacy networks, such as EBC, but also the industry to create this consensus on how to promote mental health and societal well-being through the expansion of access of evidence-based quality mental health interventions for those in need and who cannot be helped by existing treatments. So the purpose is to develop psychedelic therapies through clinical trials to create the evidence, convince regulators, but also generate the access for people living with a mental health condition. And today's program is really to tell you about the stories of people in need, but also to leverage the scientific evidence around those issues. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker, Theo Giubielli. I'm sorry for the pronunciation, but Theo, you don't really have a background in mental health or in medicine or science. You're like me, you're a policy scientist, but a very strong advocate for mental health. And you are the initiator and the founder of PsychedeliCare. So can you lead us through what it is, what is the initiative, and what hopes can it bring to our advocacy work? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for. Okay.
So normally it's not allowed to come with fans in the European Parliament, but you did a great job.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to MEP Tilimes and Tomislav Sokol for their introduction, and their team also to helping us organizing such an event. Today marks the European launch of the European Citizen Initiative, PsychedeliCare, which aims at calling the European Union to take action on the use of psychedelics in therapy and propose a framework for its implementation in the member states. I'm not going to take too long with the presentation, but on a personal level, I'm really glad to see all the faces in the room with people I've worked now since a year or two with some, and this event is also the occasion to connect and finally meet. So I'm really glad for that. Since we've started preparing this initiative a bit more than 2 years ago, we were joined by many from the four corners of Europe and beyond. Despite the fact that we share different backgrounds, whether professional or personal, different experiences and bringing different stories, but also sharing, in many cases, different languages, behind this initiative, we all share the same observation, the same conclusions. We are going through a mental health crisis. In many regards, this is a crisis that is getting worse. The numbers and the stories behind the statistics, they are quite worrying. This crisis, it affects us all as individuals, as families, as communities, but as societies as a whole. For many people, and it represents millions across the EU who are struggling with severe mental disorders, from depression, anxiety, addictions, post-traumatic stress disorders, the tools and the treatments that we propose, they are sometimes inefficient. Sometimes people develop resistance to treatments, but in many cases, they are just simply not viable. And the observation we share in the end is quite clear. We are struggling to treat the mind, and the EU can, and the EU should do better. The resurgence of research internationally shows that what we call psychedelic-assisted therapies, and I believe that the next speakers will go more into details about what these are, they are extremely promising to help treat the conditions mentioned before, among others. The results we get from clinical trials, from university research, shows that usually these psychedelic-assisted therapies are quite safe and in many cases more efficient than the current treatments. I personally come from Strasbourg and in France, and 2 hours from there in Switzerland, patients can already have access to psychedelic-assisted therapies. And this is since 2014. And Switzerland is not the only example. Australia, Canada, the US, countries are moving forward with legal implementation. Even in the European Union, we start to see interest from some governments, like in the Netherlands. But it's also important to note that the current scientific research and the knowledge we have around these substances, like psilocybin from magic mushrooms, from DMT, This knowledge directly comes from indigenous communities who have been using these substances for healing purposes since centuries. So in the EU, we can and we should learn from all of them, from these communities in particular, from the ongoing research, from countries that are moving forward. And this is really the reasons why we're here today in this building, in the European Parliament, because we believe that it's time that the EU steps in and takes action in favor of psychedelic-assisted therapies. So we are coming with this initiative as citizens, psychologists, researchers, associations, neuroscientists, patients, and individuals looking for better solutions for their loved one, or for themselves, to call the EU to recognize the potential of these therapies. So in the end, we all believe that European citizens should have access to this form of therapies, should they need to, in the most safe, affordable, and efficient manner. We launched our campaign with our partners that you can see on the screens, different kind of partners, organization on harm reduction, on education, on psychedelics, on indigenous representation, rights defenders, right to enjoy the benefits of scientific research, association on European democracy as well. And we launched our initiative to collect 1 million signatures on 14th of January 2025. And we have 1 year to collect 1 million signatures. And if we get them, we'll ask the Commission to take action on 3 pillars. One is to develop common standards across the EU to ensure that patients have access in a safe and accessible and affordable manner to these treatments. And we believe that these standards should be developed with the support of patient associations, of researchers, of indigenous communities, of psychologists and psychiatrist associations across the EU and beyond. The second one is to boost EU-funded research on psychedelic substances and their use in therapy, and notably because we need more data on certain aspects of this therapy, but also because other conditions, psychedelics show potential to treat other conditions, and we need more information. And we'll get also a talk about how EU-funded research can help in bringing more information to the table. And the third one is also really important because we want the European Commission to issue a recommendation for the member state to take a common position to address international regulation of psychedelic substances, because today is still slowing down research and policy initiatives in many ways. But apart from these official requests to the European Commission, if we get the 1 million days, one main objective to this initiative. Since research officially stopped in the late 60s and 70s on the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics, one of the biggest obstacles preventing new scientific research, political and civil initiative, and rational debates to take place, it was and it still is stigma. There is a huge gap between what science says about psychedelics and their use in mental health and what the public perception is about it. So through this year campaign, we want to share rational facts about psychedelics, psychedelic-assisted therapies, and fostering debates in the different member states and within European Union institutions. And it starts today. So to conclude, we as societies, we just simply cannot afford to deprive ourselves from these instruments that show so much potential, so much benefits. So this is why we are glad to launch this European Citizen Initiative to care together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Theo. So I'll refer everyone to the QR code on the slide, but also feel free to get to Theo at the end of the event if you haven't signed the petition yet, or to seek information about it. Anyone online, if you have any questions, please log them on the platform. So we'll consider your questions for you to contribute to the Q&A. So we will have an open discussion at the end of the presentations. So if you have any thoughts or anything you'd like to say, prepare your contribution, and I'll ask you to introduce yourself and state your comment and to who it is directed. But Theo, before anything else, I'd like to thank you on behalf of PAREA for the collaboration in the co-organization of today's event, because it's not only the official launch of the petition, but also the relaunch of the MEP Action Group on psychedelics in healthcare, which PAREA is supporting through the Secretariat. you can speak to the man on the first row in black and white, Tadeusz, and he will provide you with all the info in regards to the program of the action group. So I'm pleased to move on to our next speaker for an introduction to psychedelics. Our next speaker is Laetitia van der Reest. She's a psychologist and PhD student with the FNRS, but at the University of Brussels. And Laetitia, you're going to talk to us about the benefits of psychedelic care in the context of alcohol use. So over to you.
Thank you. I'm just confused who is moving through my slides. It's you. Okay. I have
Just shout in the air and it will magically flow.
Okay. And just to clarify, I'm going to provide an introduction to psychedelics, not about alcohol use disorder or anything. Can you hear me all right, actually? Okay. Well, is this better? Oh, this is better, right? Okay. So yes, very happy to be here and provide a basic introduction into psychedelics. First of all, when we talk about psychedelics, what are we talking about? On the one hand, we are talking about serotonergic psychedelics, or also called classic psychedelics, that include LSD, ayahuasca, which is a traditional Amazonian brew containing DMT that can also be consumed in its pure form, mescaline, which is found in a number of cacti, including the peyote cactus, and psilocybin, the main psychoactive component of magic mushrooms. We're also talking about atypical psychedelics, including MDMA, also referred to as an entactogen to touch within, or empathogen to increase empathy, emotional connection. We are talking about ketamine, also referred to as a dissociative, and ibogaine. Next. And so serotonergic psychedelics are called like this because their primary mechanism of action is through agonism or activation of the serotonin 2A receptors in the brain. As you can see here, the molecular structure resembles that of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter and neuromodulator that we produce in the brain and the gut. Next. So when we talk about psychedelics, what are we talking about? The term psychedelic was coined by psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond in his letters to the writer Aldous Huxley in 1956. He wrote, "To fathom hell or soar angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic." And psychedelic comes from the Greek and means mind manifesting. So psychedelics are said to induce a non-ordinary state of consciousness, and I'm going to go through some of the major effects with you. That include elementary imagery and complex imagery. For that, I had a video, but I think it got lost in translation, so I will leave it up to your imagination. Can you go back, please? Yes, thanks. But so you might see mainly with closed eyes, shapes, color, geometric patterns, but also more complex scenes and landscapes, for instance, or just like dreamlike scenes. You also have impaired control and cognition, disembodiment, so to be disconnected to one's body, sometimes anxiety, but also blissful states, spiritual experiences, and feelings of unity, connection with living beings, nature, the universe, as well as audiovisual synesthesia, which is a blending of the senses, whereby you might, for instance, see music dancing in front of your eyes. Two other important dimensions not mentioned here are insights, so to come to realization that seem very important and true to the person experiencing them, as well as changed meaning of percept, where things might acquire novel meanings. Next. Yes. So now we'll go to a little bit of history. So psychedelics have been used by humans since ancient times, with source of use in what's now called Europe and Africa and the Americas, dating from 4000 BC. Next. And they've been rediscovered in the lab, first with the isolation of mescaline at the end of the 19th century by a Hefter, but maybe most importantly for their use in psychiatry, the synthesis of LSD by Albert Hofmann in 1938. Yes, next. So Hofmann was a chemist working for Sandoz, and he was looking to develop analeptics. Analeptics are compounds that stimulate the respiratory and circulatory system, so nothing to do with an altered state of consciousness. And he was working with ergots, not yet, sorry. Yes, thanks. He was working with ergot derivatives and synthesized, among other, LSD-25, which wasn't a good analeptic, so it basically got forgotten. Until, according to Hoffman, around 1943, he had an intuition to go back to the compound and resynthesize it. He was very careful, but seems to have contaminated himself and had the first non-intentional LSD experience that was marked by restlessness, dizziness, but also vivid imagination and kaleidoscopic visions. I think we are having a psychedelic experience now.
That's not an attempt to have everyone relive the experience, no.
No video, but some experience yet. So that left him curious and puzzled, and he decided to experiment with LSD intentionally this time 3 days later. He took a very small amount, 250 micrograms, but LSD is very potent. What he thought was a small amount was actually a rather high dose. And so on the 19th of April, 1943, yes, thank you. He basically had the first intentional LSD experience, which was very strong. He had to ask his lab assistant to escort him back home by bike. This is today still yearly remembered as Bicycle Day. And basically he had a very scary experience because he was having visions, he was terrified, he was thinking that he might die, imagining his children becoming fatherless. He called his GP, who checked on his vitals. Everything was fine. So he could finally relax and start enjoying the experience somewhat until, exhausted, he fell asleep, to awake the next morning refreshed, with a clear head, though still somewhat tired physically. He reports a sensation of well-being and renewed life flowing through him. The world was as if newly created. From there on, Sandoz decided to market LSD as Delicid, and what we often don't know is that in the 50s and 60s, over 40,000 people got treated with LSD. So at first, it was thought that LSD mimicked the psychotic state and could help psychiatrists better understand the patients they were treating by experiencing psychosis firsthand. However, that was soon dropped, and LSD became used as a therapy, treating people with existential distress linked to life-threatening diseases, people with symptoms that today would be related as depression, as well as addiction. Here you can read an extract from a scientific article by Schwellers and colleagues who worked with LSD and addiction, alcohol addiction. It was published in 1959. The conclusion is reached that self-surrender and self-acceptance are more easily achieved in the LSD experience, and the thesis is developed that the resolution of the problem of the person with alcohol use disorder lies in this surrender. However, soon enough, LSD escaped the labs, became associated with the counterculture, and in what is today referred to as a wave of moral panic. Psychedelics were made controlled substance. They were scheduled to Schedule 1 on the United Nations Convention for Psychotropic Substances, which obliged member states to enforce much stricter regulation on them, and that essentially stopped all clinical research as well as above-ground therapeutic use. And this is reflected in a drop in scientific publication on the topic since the scheduling. But that has changed. I always say recently, but it's now almost 30 years that actually research started again. And more recently, we see an exponential increase into psychedelic research in what has been called the psychedelic. It's coming. Renaissance. You can go next. This renaissance has been characterized by, among other, clinical research, so research into psychedelic-assisted therapy for mental health care. Here you see a headline of the New York Times: "The psychedelic revolution is coming. Psychiatry may never be the same." So it's somewhat sensational, as often with media, but it also reflects hope in a landscape where there has been little psychiatry innovation in the past decades, as was said previously. So David will tell you more about the results of these trials, but I'm going to quickly zoom in on the therapeutic framework. What are we talking about when we talk about psychedelic assisted therapy? Do we send people home with psychedelics? Do they take it every day like antidepressants? Are we doing high doses or this thing called microdosing? Well, let's see. But to understand the framework, it's good to understand that psychedelics are considered more or less as non-specific amplifiers of the psyche, but of everything really. So they will amplify one's internal experience, emotions, cognitions, physical sensations, but they will also make one more sensitive to context, so the physical and social environment. And with that in mind, studies are conducted with the intent to create a sense of comfort and safety for participants who are going through a psychedelic experience. Most clinical trials have relied on a three-phase model that starts with preparation, usually 2 to 4 preparation sessions lasting from 1 to 2 hours. There, the participants meet the therapist that he's going to work with through the process. It's usually 2 therapists, often a male and a female. The participant is not on a psychedelic, and the goal is to start creating trust between the participant and the therapist, a therapeutic alliance, to provide psychoeducation into the effect of psychedelics, but also the attitude with which to approach the experience, one of openness, curiosity, trust, letting go, and to support the person in the process of setting an intention. What do they want to get out of the experience? Then comes the dosing session. So it's not something that's done often or very close together. Most studies have used 1 to 3 dosing sessions at least 2 weeks apart. And during the dosing session, both therapists are going to be present for the whole duration of the acute effect, depending on the substance. It can be 1 hour with some more novel compound being tested like 5-MeO, DMT, and DMT, 4 to 6 hours with psilocybin, much longer with LSD, around 12 hours. But the therapists are not going to provide talk therapy. The participants is really encouraged to go on an internal journey. So they are provided with eye shades to avoid visual distractions and noise cancelling headphones through which they can listen to a curated playlist, mostly instrumental, of which the goal is to promote relaxation, but also elicit emotions. And the therapists are there should the participant need support, but they will not, conduct talk therapy. This is an example of a dosing session room in a hospital. The goal is to create a sense of comfort and safety. After the dosing comes the integration. There again, the participant is not on a psychedelic. He continues with the team. It's usually 2 to 4 integration sessions of 1 to 2 hours as well. The goal there is to assist the participant in their process of making sense of the experience, as well as in attempting to translate insights or some meaningful parts of the experience into meaningful daily life changes as to enhance the therapeutic impact. Very important prior to all of that is the screening, because psychedelic assisted therapy might not be for everyone. At the moment, for instance, we do not include people with psychotic or bipolar disorder. That's based on the assumption that psychedelic administration might induce a psychotic or manic episode in people who are prone to getting them, so not in people that are not at risk. However, this might change based on incoming safety data, for instance, in people with bipolar type 2, suggesting that it might be safe in this population, but these data are preliminary. So that brings me to safety. As we know, as we have seen, psychedelics are currently Schedule 1 substances. That means that they have a high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use. So we are going to look at very briefly at 2 studies. This is a very famous graph from a seminal study published in 2010 by Nutt, who is unfortunately not here today, and colleagues. No, not. Yes, that's the pain of animation. It can make it exciting, but also problematic. So in this study, they gathered a drug expert from the UK and asked them to score a number of drugs on different categories that can be categorized in 2 overarching categories: harm to self, meaning drug-related mortality, drug-related injury, loss of employment, dependence, and so on, and harm to others. That can mean crime, injury caused to others, family problems, environmental damage, and so forth. And based on these scores, they calculate a final score for each substance. And what's interesting to see is that the highest scoring substance was alcohol, and that we find psychedelics at the very bottom of the list with ecstasy or MDMA, LSD, and psilocybin containing mushrooms. And this goes to say that the legal status of drugs is not always based on their harm profile as assessed by drug experts. Next, here is a more recent review published in 2022 that looks at the psychological risk and physiological risk of serotonergic psychedelics, so LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, DMT, and that concluded that the medical risks are often minimal and that many, albeit not all, of the negative perception of psychological risks are unsupported by the currently available scientific evidence, with the majority of adverse effects not being observed in a regulated or medical context, and I would further specify supportive therapeutic context. However, as we are conducting more and more research, there is also a general desire among researchers and clinicians working with psychedelics to better characterize and understand the risks associated with these compounds, but not based on stigma, fears, beliefs, but based on empirical data. And here you can see a number of articles that were published all in 2024 that try to look at challenging experiences or adverse events associated with psychedelics. Because if they are to become part of the toolbox in psychiatry, we need to really understand everything that comes with them, also when it doesn't go so well or when it's more challenging, so that we can best possible support people. Yes. This allows me to circle back to the PsychedeliCare initiative, because in order to better understand psychedelics and their mid and long-term impacts, also, not necessarily at the large group level, but what can happen sometimes for 1%, 2% of participants, we need funding to conduct research. And also, as you have seen, the therapists are quite important in the process of psychedelic-assisted therapy. And that's why it's very important to develop European ethical standards and guidelines for the provision of these treatments. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Laetitia, for this thorough introduction. I'm happy to hand over to our next speaker, whom you alluded to, Professor David Erizzo. So, David, I don't know where to start reading your CV and your background. You're currently a clinical director and senior lecturer in psychiatry at Imperial College in London, but you've been traveling a lot in New York, Copenhagen, and so on and so forth. We can say you're an expert in the neurobiology of many disorders, such as addiction and others, but you're going to talk to us about the state of the art in psychedelic research. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me here. Thanks to Pareja and the PsychedeliCare initiative and the Brain Council and everybody else involved in this event. I'm very happy to be here and to try to share that with this very inflated title. I didn't make it about where we are with some of the science. So we are doing some of that, and a lot of others around the world are doing great work, both in industry and in academia, to try to understand these drugs better, both in terms of how they might work, but also in particular the efficacy and safety in the development for a range of different mental health conditions, which is sort of in the focus of what we are pushing for. So here in this talk, I'll try to touch on these 4 themes. So what is happening in the space, how active is it, and how far is the development, mainly focused on the industry very briefly, and then how do we actually conduct the research, how do we try to understand the drugs and their effects, and where is the current evidence, and with focus for depression, because the classics I'm furthest developed for depression, so I'll focus on that, and then touch as well on how they differ from existing conventional treatments, which is exactly where it becomes very exciting. And Laetitia already massively alluded to it by explaining what these drugs are and how they work. So basically, if there's a company out there listening and they're not on the slide, then don't shoot me. It's not me who made this slide, but this is a a big overview of what's happening in the psychedelic pharma industry. In the bullseye, that is the drugs that are approved. And as you can see, there are not really any apart from Johnson's Spravato S-ketamine nasal spray that has been licensed for treatment-resistant depression. Then you had the MEPs or pro-profit version like us developing MDMA therapy that basically was kissing the bullseye of this plot, but didn't get through earlier last year, but are now sort of going to launch most likely another phase 3 trial. But you can see that when you get close to that center, the approval, you have people in the yellow, which is the last clinical phase of human trialing, and you have, for instance, psilocybin being tested in that late phase for treatment-resistant depression, and they are likely to complete in 2026, and then then they'll work on the data and then submit to the regulatory bodies, probably primarily FDA, and then we'll see. But you can see it's approaching, which is very exciting. On this slide, there's no academic developments, and I think it's important to mention that several groups, also actually our own group for the new trials we are launching governmental supported trials in both gambling and opioid use disorders. And those trials have a commercialization strategy behind them. So that means the IP, as it's called, is being protected. And that means in a way they might enter the plot at some stage if they are then handed over to industry. So that's in a way hidden from this slide, what's happening outside the actual industry. How do we test them? Letitia already mentioned, so I'm not going into it. This is our setting that we have done some trials in London, and we have a research clinic called Cyprus where we do some of the trials. And that is now actually converting into a real clinic for real patient in the NHS for ketamine that we are launching very soon in that space, because it's important that it's not just about the drugs, it's also about the preparations, guiding and integration. Some of the industry are trying to slim that out, and it's not just because they're with an absolute capitalist hat on trying to get rid of the expensive part, might play a role as well, but it's also because of the regulatory system that FDA, EMA, MHRA, and these bodies, they cannot regulate and approve proper talking therapy. So therefore, the model is being slimmed a bit in this phase of trying to get them through to approval. So when we do trials, already explained, there's preparation, dosing, integration, obviously a screening first, and then some follow-up of the data. The very simple way of testing it is that you just have a single arm, which is called open label, where you just prepare people, give the dose, and then you do measurements before and after. Then you can test within subject. You can test the same subject before and after. And it does carry quite a lot of value to do that early on when you test a new indication with one of the drugs. Because you don't need to do a complicated big trial where you randomize people to two arms. But you can also implement a placebo into a single arm. So you have people having a placebo and also a psychedelic experience, but without randomizing them to two different conditions. So they all get the same through the trial. So we have used both quite a lot in our developments. And then the gold standard is what most of the companies are doing there. And we are also sometimes doing that in trials where people get randomly allocated to either control condition, could be a placebo, could be an active placebo. There's a very exciting trial coming out of Germany called Episode Trial, where they had also active placebo with interesting data. It's not public yet. And then you test the two groups towards each other to see whether if a proper trial drug has better efficacy compared to what's happening in the control arm. And you can also in there test within subject in the arm that got the active drug. So what we and others are doing, we are using different brain imaging techniques to try and understand the brain better, try to understand the conditions better, and in this case, also try and understand how these drugs work. I won't go into it, so I've just put a review here that we did last year instead, because it will be too heavy for this presentation. But I think it's worth mentioning that we believe that the imaging actually plays always a role in drug development, but it might play an even bigger role in psychedelics because you have different inbuilt issues and challenges that you cannot properly placebo control a full-blown psychedelic experience. Therefore, mechanistic additions to our understanding is important, so we can actually see there's something different happening with these drugs if we compare them to an SSRI, as we have done, or to placebo and so on. Thanks. So in terms of how the evidence look, we have tried very recently here in our team to create an overview plotting trials. And obviously it's a bit of a messy slide, but the little numbers represent the effect sizes. So that how strong are the clinical effects on the different trials at different time points. And now the numbers might not say much, but they are quite big effect sizes. So that is why the hype is there also in the clinical development, because it does look very good. This is blocking me. How do I can't see my own heading anyway. So this is within subjects. So this is when you test the same people before and after, you can calculate how big are the effects of that change. And what is interesting, when you look at later time points, so every time a trial has reported data from a later time point, we have that to the right-hand side on this slide. And then the different colors represent different drugs and conditions and so on. So even more important is the between groups. So that is what the regulatory bodies are mainly going to focus on. And here you can see, and there are data here that you probably haven't seen, including the DMT trial that we at Imperial supported small pharma in doing, which was a DMT infusion trial in depression. And you can see that the effect sizes across these different drugs, psilocybin, ayahuasca, DMT, across these trials, again, are strong. And for comparison, we have added on here, so meta data from SSRI treatment and also from ketamine treatment, the ketamine that is already licensed for depression, and you can see it does look quite strong when you look at the sizes of the effects. So anyway, that is all of this slide is all about depression. Similar data on smaller scale is coming out, including also we have been doing OCD, chronic pain, anorexia nervosa. Others are doing the same. Data also look good and promising for that, but the main data body of evidence sits for depression with the classic psychedelics. So in terms of what they are doing. So one thing is the efficacy and the safety. That's obviously instrumental and important for the approval phase. But what about what patients actually would like to improve or get better in regards to when they suffer depression? Interestingly, if you ask psychiatrists like myself to rate different things that we think are the priority in order to sort out for a patient, so to speak, then the list becomes like that. And that obviously will be the core definition, core criteria for depression defined by psychiatrists anyway, that are slightly arbitrary to some degree, the way that we diagnose and define depression. If you actually ask people suffering depression or having suffered, and then ask them to prioritize it, then it's other things like feeling joy, meaning of life, those kind of things. They actually are prioritized higher than just getting rid of the core symptoms of depression. And I think that is, and that speaks to how these drugs are different. And in order to get our heads around how they are different, I will start with the concept of being stuck. I think that stuckness, being trapped in an inverted space, whether it is rumination, if you, for instance, suffer depression, whether it's being hijacked by salient cues related to your addiction, whether it's obsessions, whatever it is, being stuck is very characteristic across mental health conditions. And this is obviously leading up to some of what the psychedelics are doing in addition to providing good efficacy with good safety. So I have here listed a number of different phenomena that I sort of have decided belong broadly to the concept of stuckness. So I won't go in detail because of time, but I put these concepts: rigidity, lack of flexibility, pre-contemplation, which is kind of not ready for change. All of it relates to stuckness. And some of them relate more or less to some mental health non-psychotic conditions, such as the 4 I've listed here. I've also listed them because we have done trials of them, but I won't show the specific data from these trials. And then in order to improve some of that sits beyond just treating the core symptoms of depression. This less stuckness, we believe, carry a lot of value, and that is why we believe the psychedelics are so incredibly exciting and promising as a new paradigm in mental health. You can see here more and more data comes out about these phenomena being improved. There's still the one with the question mark we are looking into in new trials, also with brain imaging and so on. And this is sort of more soft data scales and tasks and so on, but brain imaging actually supports some of it when we can task it and image it. But I won't go into the details about the brain itself. So interestingly, you can see some of they speak actually to kind of the opposite direction of what some people on SSRIs complain about, this flattening, this flattening of affect, being blunted. And as you can see, if anything, it looks like psychedelics are sort of taking that lid off, almost an anti-blunting effect, which I think is very, very valuable as an alternative paradigm. So it's not just about the effects of the core symptoms of depression. That's my main take-home message. So how do they differ? They differ in what I just showed, but they also differ by being this fantastic combination where psychiatry meets psychology, where pharmacology meets therapy, because they're drug-induced states, altered state of consciousness that are combined with therapy. But as the companies, as I mentioned, are reducing the therapeutic package in order to get it through the approval process, then it's obviously quite important for maybe in particular independent academic investigations to try and understand the role of the actual therapy better. That's difficult to do at large scale, but there are already some indications, mainly coming from ketamine. I won't go in detail. One of the best studies, I think, is Celia Morgan's team from Exeter in the UK with alcohol use disorder, with ketamine treatment, with and without a targeted talking therapy package. And you can see, if you look at it, that the most efficient is when it comes with that therapy. So you see that it looks like there is added effect of packing in the psychedelic experience in some therapy. In addition, it's a different paradigm to what we are used to in psychiatry because of the actual experiential component, the altered state of consciousness, everything that Letitia spoke about. Interestingly, we can see this is from the very first trial that was done in modern era of psychedelic development. Was we did a trial in depression with psilocybin, and when we looked at the people who responded, so the responders to the psilocybin therapy, the ones that had the best response, most antidepressant effects, were the one who had most of a mystical type experience. So the profoundness, the depth, the nature of the experience seem to be predictive of the response. And that is being found across many, many studies and across indications. And that really speaks to a very exciting and different paradigm compared to what we're used to. And we also see it in new data that is not all out yet, including in the small pharma DMT study. So it's very reproducible. And then it's very difficult to test, is the experience necessary? If people are developing non-psychedelic psychedelics, which is happening, that's exciting and interesting to see. But if we believe the experience actually is important, then how do we test it? One little attempt was what we did in some data we had at Imperial, where we had interrupted people with a DMT experience. And we could see, and we had others we didn't interrupt. We interrupted them by asking a rating every minute. So we basically interrupted their experience. When we did that, we can see they have obviously less of a mystical type experience and they improve less in well-being. These were healthy, quite experienced psychedelic people. So that speaks to that maybe the experience is important. If the experience really doesn't matter, then microdosing should be fine. Obviously the doses are different, so we can't directly compare it, but I would say we are reviewing that and coming out soon. It has been underway for a long time with an overview of what is happening with microdosing, what is the evidence, also for evidence for mood-related affective symptoms, and it doesn't look particularly promising beyond placebo. So again, it doesn't support that, oh, it doesn't matter about the experience. And then what could be done? You could obviously test them under sedation. This is very mechanistic, or you could do it during sleep. And then obviously the development of the non-psychedelic psychedelics will also help us understand that. So that's in development and will be interesting to find out more about the nature of the actual experience of the drug. Now it's not changing. Oh, sorry. And I will very soon stop here. This is my last slide. So if we can see that there's a relationship between the nature and profoundness of the psychedelic experience, the mystical element of it, the peak experience, then obviously it's also important for us to predict who gets such an experience. How can we best try and understand who might be suited for it, who might not be suited for it? So therefore, we are looking into our own data and also other people's data, and a lot has been published on this, and we can see some things are positively pushing towards more likelihood of having such a peak experience. We can also see the opposite, that some other factors, including these ones, are somewhat predictive of a challenging experience. And then you have things that are just enhancers. So if you are high on personality trait absorption, you will just have more likelihood of getting both more peak and more challenging. And the same, obviously, with higher doses of those responses, the higher dose, you'll have more likelihood of either of it. We also have, as was mentioned by Laetitia, looked into, because it's important to zoom into the few who actually crash a bit and don't have positive or even negative effects. So we have looked at people who had negative psychological after effects more than 3 days after a psychedelic experience. This was from survey and from interviews. And we can see some of the same things that I can't see on my slide because there's something blocking it, and I can't see it up there. But those factors are sort of nicely related to the other one in pink, that are related to what seems to predict a more difficult time, a more challenging experience. So obviously, we are also trying, and others are as well, to develop scales and measures and assessments to try baseline before you treat, to find out who might be best suited. And if they're not perfectly suited, can you prepare them better on some of these aspects in order to make them well prepared? So that is also part of what the science is about. And then I will stop there and thank the team back home in London. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. And thanks for this, this approach, this update, but also for emphasizing and touching upon what the experience is, but also focusing on the expectations and needs of people living with the mental health issue, because it's a fantastic segue for me to introduce our next speaker, Andrea Ciclari. Andrea, you're coming with no particular title today other than being an expert by experience. And you're going to provide us with a testimonial on your experience of a psychedelic assisted therapy for a life-threatening illness. So the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Frederick. Thank you all. I'm really honored to be here today and to represent the patients. Really, I learned a lot already from these last two presentations. So thank you so much, all of you, for everything that you do for us, the patients. So I live in Switzerland, where so I had access to psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. My story starts in 2019 when I was diagnosed with colon cancer, stage 4, with mets to the liver and in distant lymph nodes. As you can imagine, a difficult moment to cope with, also mentally. I was 36 years old, father of 3 little children, in the middle of my professional career. And so I prematurely was confronted with death for the first time in my life, but I wanted to live. So, of course, I did all the classical treatments, chemotherapy, several surgeries, gathered a lot of knowledge about the disease. So I became something like an empowered patient in a certain way. I had a few experiences with substances in my youth. I was drawn to LSD, having an experience once, but I never dared. And I think Laetitia mentioned the moral panic really worked well on me. I was scared of it. It had a really bad reputation. I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to end up in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my life. But somehow I was again drawn to this substance, as I thought now it's maybe time to do it. I was in the middle of my very aggressive chemotherapy treatments then, and I remember one night I researched about it, and I found the clinical study in Switzerland with the University of Basel measuring anxiety in patients with potentially fatal diseases. So I enrolled, I was accepted. The study was foreseeing 4 whole day sessions, 2 with placebo and 2 with LSD. It's a rather big, higher dose, I would say, at 200 micrograms. The idea was really to have a significant experience, but at the same time, not to forget where you are in a certain way, that you can always recall that this is just an experience and you're just sitting there in an office. So I had met my therapist prior to the experience. I had a good feeling with her. I could really think I can trust her in a vulnerable situation. And so we set an intention together. So I set an intention with her guidance. And for me, it was really, I wanted to know something that I'm ignoring about my health. Well, where does it come from? Maybe I can access something that can give me answers in this case. And then off I went. This was now May 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. I had this very interesting 12-hour trip, my very first LSD experience. It's always really hard to explain it. No? Sometimes I can talk for hours about what I have actually experienced during that day. So I experienced disembodiment. This is another word I learned from Letizia today. I felt one with everything around me. I no longer had my usual identity. I was no longer Andrea. I was seeing my existence being a very tiny part of what I actually am. So this experience here in this world is just a very tiny experience of what I could identify with at the moment. It was infinitely small, but yet extremely significant and worth living. I relived my birth and so many births before that. At some point, I identified with all of humanity and was able to easily change in between dimensions. Maybe to summarize that experience, I was having a glimpse behind the curtains of life. I also became aware of trauma that previous generations in my family had lived and that I was unaware of. And I think this new awareness healed me in many ways. And then at some point, my therapist in the afternoon, when I started to be able to interact again, when I was slowly, I had passed the peak, she asked me again about my intention, asking me very politely and very cautiously, trying not to disturb the trip I was in. She asked me, did you get any access to anything about healing, about your disease? And so I connected in that moment to that question. And the reply I received was, you are alive today, and that is all that matters. Past, present, all that didn't exist anymore in that world. And that teaching is something that really shapes my view of life and death today. So after the clinical study, I had another trip that was really also very significant, and then the 2 placebo sessions. And after that, I had the privilege to join a group therapy where we are about 10 patients from with different psychiatric diagnoses. It's facilitated by Peter Gasse and Anke Reerskamp. And I did another few sessions for a few years. So we meet more or less every 3 months. I concluded this last year. And also there it's harder to speak about myself, about the progress I made in these years, but I could really see absolutely amazing results in other patients. Severely depressed patients who I could see them slowly coming back into life. What has changed for me? And it's also there I try to differentiate between what is like the disease already changes your perspectives on things. Then, of course, maybe midlife crisis at my age or just becoming more mature altogether. But what I can really attribute to LSD is probably my relationship with emotions. Having grown up as a man, I tended to avoid certain emotions, which were sanctioned by society, and during the trips, really, these were profound insights and liberating certain emotions within me. Altogether, I probably judge less. Everything seems valid. Every form of life seems valid if it made it to today. What David was mentioning, this feeling of less stuck, I can totally relate with that. Less stuck in roles that society or family had put on me, and I feel more myself. My view on death also changed. Like, kind of have the feeling that I've seen what I'm expecting in a certain way. So that makes it also less scary. And I also feel stronger roots with my family. Things that were ignored before that I could really shed light on and work on in therapy afterwards. And one more thing is I think less and I feel more. And maybe to conclude, and I don't know if we have time for a few questions. I've been through these treatments. I always felt perfectly safe. I had no unpleasant side effects. And they've been pretty efficient from what I can say. So I really hope that more patients can have access to these kind of treatments. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for opening up to a personal story here. We will open up for Q&A after our next presentation. So if you have any questions to Andrea, please be prepared. But I have an immediate one, actually, personally, and I'll use my privilege as moderator, because you were saying that, I mean, the extent to which it was life-changing for you, generally speaking, but you had access to that clinical study because you were living with cancer. How did that enable you to actually, pick up the fight against that disease? Because we very often relate comorbidities in mental health as a success factor in the way by which to address other health issues, such as cancer, for instance. But I mean, other disease areas are also mentioned. But can I just test you on how did it enable you to actually be stronger in that fight?
Well, I think obviously when you do this kind of fights with very aggressive treatments, the mental factor is of really strong important, but it's very important. With having a good network that helps you around you, family is obviously crucial, but just your mental well-being will help you fight. Like, if you're well in your mind, it will also help you to fight physical diseases.
Thank you for that. Our next speaker is Francisca Silva. So Francisca, you are a researcher in brain and mind sciences, but you are now with the team of Parea. And before that, you worked at the European Medicines Agency. You were notably in charge of the workshop in Amsterdam dealing with, let's say, the implications of research and evidence in psychedelic care. And you're going to lead us through a specific project, which is called Psychedelic. So the floor is yours, Francisca.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you to everyone here, and thank you, Andrea, for sharing your story. And I'll be briefly talking about unmet medical needs in mental health, and yes, introducing the EU-funded Psychedelic project. And I guess I'll let you know when I want the next slide. Yeah, okay. So Fred has already kindly introduced Parea, so we don't need to, in the interest of time, we can go to the next slide. Yeah. So, yeah, we can go to the... I'm sure that everyone in this room is aware of the global mental health crisis that we are currently undergoing. So zooming in Europe in 2018, 1 in 6 people had a mental health disorder, and this was before the COVID-19 pandemic. So of course it's expected to have increased. And in terms of lifetime prevalence, actually half of the population will experience a mental illness at least once. And this carries significant burden, not just at personal level, but also at societal and economical levels. It will affect well-being, productivity in the workplace. It poses strain on already stretched thin healthcare systems. It can cost up to 4% of the Europeans' GDP annually. And alongside mental disorders, there is an increased risk of other chronic conditions like cardiovascular conditions or diabetes. And then the opposite is also true, where people with other conditions are more likely to experience mental health disorders. This just carries additional multidimensional burden and costs. And we can move on to the next slide. I see they take a little bit to catch up. This is also against a backdrop of significant treatment gaps in mental health care, for example, in depression, which is one of the most common mental health disorders. Up to 75% of people don't receive adequate treatments. And of those that do, up to half don't have complete treatment response or treatment resistance. And we have to remember that untreated and severe mental disorders, they're mortal. They carry increased risk of suicide and also shorter life expectancy by 10 to 20 years. And this is, as was mentioned before, against a backdrop of largely stagnated innovation in psychiatry in past decades. This can be seen in the pattern of marketing authorization approvals by the EMA in past years. For example, in 2022 and 2023, of 166 new medicines on the market, actually none of them were in the psychiatry therapeutic area. And then when new medicines do enter the market, very often they don't introduce new treatment mechanisms and are rather improving on safety profiles of existing approaches. And there's reasons for this. I mean, the brain is incredibly complex. We still don't fully understand mental health and brain health from the scientific lens. And maybe some early theories were focusing on isolated neurobiological mechanisms. And now more and more we're moving towards looking at the complex interplay with other systems, not just in the body, but also with external factors in the environment, like the occurrence of traumas or socioeconomical factors as well. We can move on to the next slide. And it's against this backdrop that I think, as again was addressed by other presenters, the potential of psychedelic therapies really shine, because they're a different treatment approach that considers all of these things. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but just want to highlight that there is increasing research interest everywhere and in Europe too. And there's been several positive signals here in Europe, early signals, positive ones. We can move on to the next slide. One of these signals, oh, I see that some of the writing there got made a little bit odd, but that's okay. Last year actually saw the announcement of the first EU-funded project on psychedelic therapy, which is Psychedelic, the main topic of my presentation. So Psychedelic is a clinical trial of psilocybin therapy for psychological or existential distress in life-limiting illnesses. It will focus on 4 medical conditions in 4 different countries. The conditions are chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, ALS, MS, and atypical Parkinson disorder. And we just addressed this, but of course, psychological and existential distress as associated with these disorders, but also other life-threatening disorders or severe disorders is another area of critical needs. As we just said, these symptoms are not only associated maybe with poor treatment outcomes overall, but also maybe treatments that are currently on the market, like psychotherapy or psychiatric medications. Sometimes they don't provide adequate relief for this dimension and of symptoms, and it just causes huge additional suffering for people receiving the diagnosis and their loved ones, their networks, and clinicians that also are struggling to support patients with this. And in this context, Psychedelic received 6.5 million euros from the Horizon Europe program to address this important question. Just some brief words on the Horizon Europe program. This is the key EU research and innovation program until 2027. It came to succeed Horizon 2020, and it focuses on the addressing of global challenges and mission-oriented policies to address these challenges. And it was proposed by the European Commission and agreed upon by the other institutions at a final budget of 95.5 billion euros, which are spread across the years and the different initiatives depicted here on this infographic source from the Commission. I won't go into it in detail, but I'm just highlighting here, for example, one of the pillars and some of the clusters receiving the budget under the pillar. The health cluster, for example, receives around 8% of the total 95.5 billion euro of the Horizon Europe program budget. And every year in its work programs, Horizon Europe sets out new funding opportunities under these different initiatives. But now we can go back to Psychedelic. So the Psychedelic consortium consists of 19 partners across 9 different countries and represents psychiatrists, palliative care physicians, psychologists, experts in psilocybin therapy, and also researchers into spiritual care. And Pareja has been actively engaging with the consortium as well. And we can go to the next slide. Among the different partners, there are 6 work packages that define the activities of Psychedelic. And you can see them on the screen now. I think it's really interesting already looking at these packages that we can see that there is a clinical trial, but it also goes beyond the clinical trial with initiatives pertaining to the training and standardization of a therapist in psilocybin therapy, therapist training, the establishment of continued care models, and ensuring patient and public involvement at every step as well, dissemination of scientific findings, and also regulatory and implementation related aspects as well. We can go to the next slide. So zooming in a little bit more on the CPAL trial itself, or the CPAL project, it can be roughly divided into 2 stages. So I will first talk about the first stage, which is going to be a 6-week-long trial taking place in the 4 different centers. It will aim to recruit 100+ patients across the different centers with the conditions that I mentioned, and also disease-associated symptoms of depression and anxiety. There will be several assessments taking place before the first dosing session, and then participants are either going to be assigned to receive 2 doses of psilocybin, first of 15 milligrams, and then of 25 milligrams in the second session, spread 2 weeks apart, or 2 doses of an active placebo. In this case, it will be a very low dose of psilocybin of just 1 milligram. These sessions, importantly, are going to be framed by preparation and integration. This framework was already explained by Leticia, and there will also be sessions in between. And the assessments are going then to be repeated after this treatment, which will have been 6 weeks after the first assessments to look at any changes. So the primary question will be to look at reductions in symptoms of depression, and also then of anxiety, demoralization, and improvements in quality of life. But it will also focus on other things, namely to understand how psilocybin therapy is working, at a biological level, at psychological level, at even spiritual level, by looking not only at biological factors like brain activity and molecules in the body related to the action of psychedelics, but also by looking at these psychological phenomena like undergoing a mystical experience or emotional breakthrough. And the influence of alliance with the therapist or rapport with the therapist is also going to be looked at. And there are going to be a number of other exploratory constructs. I think this represents what was said before, that we need to remember also, not just from the scientific lens, the reduction in just diagnostic symptoms, but also just these other measures like spiritual well-being and ability to cope with an illness. The influence of psilocybin therapy on these is also going to be investigated. And also in the care perspective, the burden to carers and the use of medical resources. We can move on to the next slide. So after these 6 weeks, there's going to be another assessment at 3 months to look at sustained changes. And then importantly, every participant is going to be given the chance of undergoing another treatment with 25 milligrams of psilocybin, and again, preparation integration sessions. And this is really important because it will give people that received maybe the active placebo, so the very low dose psilocybin in the main trial phase, they will have the chance to now go the active real treatment here. And every participant after these 3 months is going to be integrated into a continued care phase, which will provide long-term support to patients and their networks beyond the clinical trial itself. It will involve the establishment of peer support networks and a digital care platform. And it really emphasizes the importance of having this patient and community-centered approach. We can go on to the next slide. So in summary, Psychedelic emphasizes a holistic approach. And on one hand, it has various carefully designed features that can help advance the psychedelic therapy fields in Europe. The potential of the fields, as I mentioned, and as it has been mentioned repeatedly today, is becoming increasingly recognized. But we need still the robust generation of more clinical data to support the safe and effective implementation into our healthcare systems. And Psychedelic has many features that will allow it to do just this. And then in addition to this, it has an interdisciplinary approach. So as I mentioned, not just focusing on developing support systems and continued care models, but also focusing, for example, on the standardization of therapist training and on the providing of therapist training. This is going to be made publicly available after, and it can set a groundwork for European standards in this area. And the use of this in palliative care and similar medical settings is going to allow to look at the feasibility of these treatments and start cost effectiveness analysis, which will be relevant for implementation as well. And importantly, to ensure that the best ethical standards are being met, there's an independent ethics advisor that was involved with experience in conducting clinical trials in these specific populations. So we can move on to the next slide, which is my last one and my conclusion. I hope it became clear today that innovative treatments in mental health care are urgently needed. And Psychedelic is a project which not only can advance the field of psychedelic therapies in the EU, but is also a really good example of how EU funds can help support these sorts of initiatives, and is also related back to the PsychedeliCare asks an example of fostering research in this area in the EU. And of course, the exploration of future calls is encouraged, and just the fostering of more research is heavily encouraged. So thank you for your attention right up until the end. And, yeah.
Thank you, Francisca, for this overview. And I'm now very happy to open the floor for discussion, questions, comments. We also have participants online, and Theo and colleagues are being tasked to monitor any questions coming in. So if you see movement on my right, it's because we will have questions online. But I'd like now to throw the ball to you. And if you can just give me a sign of hands. I have one comment here, another here, a third one for, okay, let's start with this. But man in the hat, please introduce yourself. And if The question is directed to anyone on the panel. Please state it so. Thank you.
Yes, hi, thanks. Can you hear me? My name's Daryl Bickler, and I've got a question about Letitia's presentation regarding David Nutt's harm index scale. And I know he's not here to defend himself about it, but it pertains to drug misuse, which is the bona fide criterion to organize public policy around. But it's frequently expressed us that these drugs are harmful, that alcohol is more harmful than psychedelics. Now, I know this serves our purposes, that psychedelics appear to be less harmful, but it's all about context, it's about setting. And it would almost suggest to a novice that they could take 4 tabs of LSD in the city centre, be safer than if they'd just had a glass of wine. And of course, as soon as we attribute safety and harmfulness to drugs devoid of context, we completely cut ourselves out, because what we're talking about is responsible activities with drugs. And therefore, I'd really like to qualify that slide when it's used in presentation, that the drugs don't have any innate characteristic of danger or harm or safety. It's always based upon context. Heroin can be the most safe drug to use in a clinical setting. There's absolutely no harms with it. So I'm just wary about the way it's interpreted. That's it. Thanks.
We'll take a few more questions, but I feel that Leticia and also David would like to answer to that. So prepare your answers. We had the lady in the front and then the 2 gentlemen on my right, and then we'll take another round.
Helle from Estonia, Psychedelic Research. What is the approach to existing traditional and alternative psychedelic practitioners? Should the new legal therapy movement replace them or educate them for safety or learn from their experience or take any action about their legal status?
And is your question addressed to anyone in particular on the panel?
No,
okay.
Who feels competent to answer?
Oh, okay,
please.
okay. So colleagues on the panel. And the gentleman over there, please introduce yourself and switch.
I'm Danny Diskin. I'm representing RAIN, which is a reforestation organization in Brazil working with indigenous groups, indigenous cultural survival. And my question is for the gentleman who shared his experience. It's for Theo, and it's for all of you, and it's for anyone over there as well. So it's really good to hear people talking about mental health, which is part of the polycrisis we're facing. It's really good to hear about people wanting to invite indigenous folk to share their traditional wisdom on councils regarding these wonderful substances. So my question is, what provisions are we going to make to preserve indigenous knowledge in situ? Right, so that means regeneration of their land, food security, cultural survival in their places. And I also want to ask another 2 things. One is, how can the psychedelic community, now we've been invited here to the European Parliament, reciprocate for all the wonderful things that we've got from the...
And to us, you didn't say anything outrageous, so try to switch on again. Can you switch it on? Because people online will
actually turned off.
Is it okay?
No, it's back.
Okay, I'm back. Am I back? Okay, thank you. And the last question is, how can an organization like RAIN, like my one, with our many connections and contacts and processes working with indigenous people in challenging contexts, how can we help? And how can you lot help me?
All right, so that's also an appeal for networking after the event. So thanks. Yes.
And another question.
Go ahead.
So everybody can hear me. So I'll follow up this question from the other side. So basically, the reintegration of psychedelic use therapy and research will probably cause a rise in the demand for indigenous knowledge, frameworks about shamanism, and renewed closeness to nature. Because no iboga without Africa, no psilocybin without forest flora, it's kind of obvious. But if you take the psilocybin out of the forest and into your society, in the center of your society, then my question is, what does our society need now to be able to absorb more forest in its center and allow a reappreciation for indigenous knowledge, or otherwise put, how and what has to change in our society to be able to integrate more psychonauts and psychedelic phenomenology and design at its center?
Okay, thank you. Can you switch off the mic now? Yeah, thanks. So let's take those questions. We'll start with Laetitia and David on the issue of harmfulness, but any other panelists, if you'd like to respond in random order, feel free to. So Laetitia first.
David, do you want to?
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say thanks. I think you are partially right, and thank you for contextualizing. But there are also neurotoxicity, cardiotoxicity, dependence potential, addiction potential associated with all these substances, and that is just different across substances. So, for instance, you name heroin, but the addiction potential of heroin is much higher. And for instance, that's something important to understand is that ketamine, for instance, which is not a serotonergic psychedelic, has a higher addiction potential than serotonergic psychedelics. And so the use of ketamine and repeated dosing of ketamine, even in the clinic, may or may not, and that phase 4 will tell us more because it's being, developed as a treatment, be at higher risk, like represent a higher risk than with classic psychedelics.
Yeah, I in a way, I'll agree with in a way that it is a bit of a tricky slide to present very quickly, because it could then seem, as you say, like, oh, you can then just wildly use everything down in the other end of that spectrum. And I totally agree, as we also in a way presented when we speak about the drugs. So we have addressed it, but just not maybe specifically on the slide, that the context is deeply important for the safety of those drugs down the other end. But to what Laetitia is saying is worth mentioning, you could eat in 100 times the normal dose, or not, maybe not 100, 10 times, 20 times of LSD, and you won't die. But you would if you do it with some of the drugs in the other end. So the toxicity and the likelihood or risk of dependence is massively in that left end. So there's a reason why they sit in the end, but yeah, the context is important, we agree.
Thank you, David. Theo, I think you also wanted to respond to other comments that were made.
Yeah, it was mainly about the integration at the European level of different associations and different perspectives in the future talks and negotiation about potential legal implementation. I think it's part of our first request is that, I mean, we propose a legal framework and a legal path to the European Commission, but of course, if we get the 1 million, the European Commission will be free to propose its own vision, but we propose a path, and we really believe that the Commission should integrate in the discussion in the first place all perspective around psychedelic and psychedelic-assisted therapies. And again, stressing the fact that we need the wisdom and the knowledge of indigenous communities because they have been integrating these healing practices in centuries. So I feel like it could be in the form of an expert group of the European Commission to discuss future implementation. It could take different forms, and also through the projects we have currently and the standards we can develop from them. But I think it's really important to involve all different perspectives and the patient voice and the indigenous communities and people who have been using these substances. So that's what we propose, and that's what we want to request to the Commission.
Yeah, thank you, Theo. And it's important also to mention that if successful, or as it will be successful, a citizens' initiative also gives right to a public hearing here in the European Parliament, which, let's say, hopefully even a bigger audience, but also lots of experts. I think Andrea or Francisca, if you have a comment to make on any of the questions that were raised. Andrea?
No, I just wanted to thank you for raising this question about indigenous communities and how you cope with substances and with mental health altogether. And I think happy that that question was asked to me. I just, as a non-expert, I just tell you what I think. And the mental health crisis we have is probably also because we have lost our traditional coping mechanisms in our Western modern society. And finding those again, our own, but also inspired by other cultures, can definitely benefit us.
Yeah, no, I also would say I very welcome that input, and actually I think it's timely to start think early on of how to implement that in, if guidelines and thoughts and working task force and so on, totally relevant and important to think into it as well. And I think there's so much to learn. I mean, with some of the drugs, you can say, I mean, LSD, MDMA, in a way developed in Europe. So in a way, it's both ways, but there's so much to learn what these drugs are doing. Some cultures have owned, embedded, and really worked with it and done it very beautifully. And the closeness and living in much closer relations to nature is more sort of maintained in those cultures who have kept on this tradition and I think there's a lot to learn there. I will say that the nature relatedness in itself, which is apparent in all trials, that we can see people become more related to nature. They suddenly stop eating meat as a random side effect, which is kind of beautiful in the time we're in a way. But in a way, is that culture? I think it's just a beautiful and meaningful thing that if we can bring people in closer to nature through these experiences, even when they're done in a very clinical, boring white room in a lab, people still feel more connected to nature. But there's a lot to learn. And reciprocity, I think, is very, very important to think of.
Thanks. Franziska, sorry.
Yeah, just corroborating some of what has been said. I think this field is so inherently interdisciplinary because of its history, as we spoke about, and there's just such great value in uniting all the different perspectives and really collaborating together.
Thank you, Franziska. I'll take another round of questions, and I see many, many hands. So I'll ask you to be extremely brief. So I would say 10 seconds. So let's start, and I'll take it like this, so you can start. Please introduce yourself.
Hello. I'm Robert. I'm from Germany. And my question is, I think, for Theo and also for Perea, and is about bottom-up against top-down approach. I want to make a superficial comparison to the US, that in Oregon, the implementation of legalization worked. On the state level, recently in last June, it didn't. And now I want to just ask to Theo and maybe also to other participants, what's your answer on that regarding changing it on a national or on a supranational level, comparing it to the EU?
Okay, thank you, Robert. So put a note, and we'll get back to this. You were next.
Yes, hello, Balthazar Benadon from Decriminalize Nature France. And I just wanted to know how PsychedeliCare would like to consider non-therapeutic use of psychedelics, for example, for a better knowledge of the person, for spiritual use or recreational use. Do you make a difference in between all those aspects?
Okay, thank you, Theo. So that's another one for you. Yes?
Hello, my name is Arianna. I'm a filmmaker from Rome. I'm curious to know if there is what is the strategy for sharing and collecting all the signature for this initiative that I think is very important also because it can represent a hope for young people that I think are very lost, especially in countries where these kind of topics are not like becoming mainstream, like Italy, for example. Thank you.
Thank you. So Theo, not only you came with fans, but it seems all the questions are for you. So I'll start with you, Tad, and then I have two other gentlemen, and then you.
Thanks, Tadeusz Parea. So I want to speak to the experiential part. The non-psychedelic psychedelics can be kind of useful in certain contexts, maybe in chronic pain and other conditions, or non-hallucinogenic psychedelic analogs, perhaps. But the experiential part is really important for us. So my question is maybe a bit provocative, but do we need, the clinical trials are important, and we need to parse out the drug and the experience, but do we need clinical trials to understand that when people say that, psychedelic experiences were among the most important experiences of their lives, on pair of birth of a child or death of a parent, and we know they are very stabilized. They are not like a Botox infusion or a vitamin injection. Do we really need to study that the human support and kind of therapeutic framework is important here. And a very quick second question. So this is maybe to David and
you're going beyond your 10 seconds, but very, very brief.
Okay, to Andrea, we know that psychedelics hypothesize to open this critical period of brain plasticity after for days or weeks. And I wanted to ask you if you had this experience of some kind of an increased psychological flexibility following your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. So please go ahead. Very briefly, please, because we have lots of questions and we'd like to enable everyone to have a floor, but really 10 seconds, please.
Eugenio from Italian Psychedelic Medicine Society. I'm wondering what could be done in terms of harm reduction policies, especially given in clinical contexts, especially I'm thinking emergency rooms in psychiatry. I see a lot of stigma from doctors and mental health professionals. So my question would be, what can be done from a public health education point of view in order to address the stigmatization and update the psychiatric toolbox with harm reduction practices?
Thank you. Go next, and then I'll take you two, and then you two, but that's over.
Hello, this is Anton from the Spanish Society of Psychedelic Medicine and INO. My question goes to Dr. David Arrizzo. I just want to know a brief summary, if possible, of what is the state of the art and future perspectives of the research of psychedelics for the treatment of addictions, and especially behavioral addictions, because I have the feeling that selling to the public opinion that psychedelics are these substances that can help us get rid of addictions to other substances is a very powerful message. Thank you.
Thank you. So you?
Hello, I'm Abhishek from a PhD student in physics, and this is a question to David. Dr. David, there's a growing research on using psychedelics to identify particular neuron and in particular region in brain that's activated during anxiety and something. So my question is that it really opens up a window to understand brain and at the same time use medicines that don't induce hallucination but help reduce mental health disorders. So can you speak on it and if there's future directions in this direction?
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Thanos and APA for the Greek Socialist Mission attached to the Sante Committee. Psychedelics have faced social, cultural, and religious challenges throughout the past 50 years. And without wanting to be reductionist, it would be good to understand those challenges. For example, we do accept, and with very good reason, the use of stimulants in pediatric populations for ADHD. We do accept other medicines that have a great potential for addiction and abuse. Nevertheless, when it came to psychedelics, there was always a backlash. Is it because they're hallucinogenic, or have political and scientific leaders understood what was the nature of that response?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Next.
Quentin from Psychedelic Society Belgium. I just had a question about the peak experiences versus challenging experiences. If anybody had comments on the therapeutic potential of going through challenging experiences, working through them, and just trying to think about this distinction that wouldn't want to stay in a dichotomy between good experience or bad experience, or
Thank you. So we had you two. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, it's Merle Gelder from Estonia. And I have a question, I think, to all of you. So when listening to Andrea's presentation, I think it's safe to say that the takeaways you had after your journeys, those would be beneficial to everybody in the population. So could we talk about, is it possible maybe to make the therapeutic use of psychedelics also available to people without formal mental disorders?
Okay, thanks.
This one? Hi, my name's Kira Reynolds. From the Irish team with with PsychedeliCare EU. I have a couple of questions. Just one for Francesca on the CPAL project. What is the process to add a new country to that? Because we'd obviously love Ireland to be involved. And then the second question is around peace building. and how we can use psychedelics in that. I've just finished some research myself and with a focus on Northern Ireland. I think it would be a brilliant pilot project because there's been enough time now, and I think it would be a great pilot there, but that we can use in other regions. So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So we are about to hit midday. It's the theoretical end time of our meeting, but we have a little bit of, let's say, segue in prolonging a little bit further. But I'll ask panelists to be brief in their response. We'll be turning like one in a row. If you feel your questions were not addressed or you would like to go a little bit deeper in the conversation, I would invite you then to approach us at the end in our networking. We have the room for a little bit longer, and that's the idea, is to carry on the conversation. So Francisca, there was a question directly addressed to you, but if you feel like addressing anything else, please go ahead, but please stick to time.
The specific question on Psychedelic, I think we can definitely network about that. And I wanted to say something quickly regarding to the first question, and I will again be very brief. I think it would be really valuable to have European level collaboration on psychedelics in terms of the setting of standards and things like this, rather than individual national approaches, because then there's repetition of work. And so I think there would be great value in promoting something at the European level, although of course there's different things happening at national level and at European, like they are different components. But yes, just wanted to make an argument for this. Yeah.
Thank you. Andrea?
Yes, just to answer Tadeo's question on the increased plasticity, flexibility in the brain. Yes, I remember I think it was my second therapy session, was all about the brain. I could feel a pressure here around the head. I could feel, I had visions of acrobats doing like incredible stretching and cleaning within the brain. And well, the advantage of this kind of drug is the long-lasting effect. That it's not something that you need to take regularly, but probably these effects become even permanent because there's new associations that can be created in the brain. And so my last treatment, for example, was in summer last year, and I don't really feel the need to go back to treatment at the moment. Like I feel like the effects are just there, shaped me into what I am now, who I am now.
Thank you, Andrea. Laetitia?
Well, regarding peace building, I think there is interesting research at Imperial. You will probably mention it, so I will not go into that. And then regarding prophylactic use, so the use of using it for everyone basically, or for prevention, I have an indirect answer. Like, it seems obvious that it could be helpful for people in terms of, psychological mechanism and stuff like that. I'm hoping that we are not going into, again, looking into some miracle solution for big systemic problems that we have. And a larger question that something I wonder about is, to what extent psychedelic can help us also in implementing bigger societal changes that we need as a society. And that links somewhat to prophylactic use and also medical use, is basically to keep in mind that it's about, finding help, but also looking at change where we need to change things at every level. And so, yeah, I think prophylactic use could be very helpful and useful, but that it's not just going to turn into some escapism from our society, so that we can keep going very fast and being very productive and not, tending to where we need to tend.
Can I just maybe in relation to that, just something that I think we need to consider is that it's happening anyway. Yeah? People are seeking self-medication with psychedelics all around Europe, and often in not so good settings. So that is something that probably we need to keep in mind when it's about regulating these drugs.
Thank you. David, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, related to the non-clinical use, so basically self-development, it's a tricky one because, yeah, as you say, it's already used. It has always been used. Absolutely fine. The issue with that is the legality, which is sitting as a complete different topic outside of the whole medicinal development and how do we regulate and trial and get them through. So could you theoretically get a trial through and get a medical indication for something that is not a disease? I mean, you have vaccinations, right? So if you can show, but how to do those trials is, I can't get my head around it. If you want to see that you can build resilience to diminish the likelihood of developing this and that method, the cohort you need to study and the time frame is absolutely insane. So I think it's probably more realistic to consider that in a different structure, think about legality and having some changes other places in society to allow that. That's my personal belief. I think it would be brilliant to do studies on resilience building for mental health, but it's difficult to do. Peace building, look up Leah Roseman, who was at Imperial, and Ripples. They do beautiful work, Israeli Palestinians. They were in Davos, where some of us were last week or the week before, and did a beautiful ceremony. They have already done studies, sessions in Spain with peace building and beautiful work. So yes, I follow you. It's a potentially very beautiful, interesting non-medical application as well, where psychedelics can play a role. In terms of Tadeu's question about, does it matter? Do we need evidence or whether the experience means anything? And do we need to try to build evidence for whether therapy is important? I think yes, in particular to the therapy, because that will be difficult to study until it potentially is approved. So in a way, it can kind of wait, but should be, think about, you have people sitting with big budgets making decisions about allocating resources and therapists within health systems. They do need to know whether it actually adds anything or not. The companies are not going to push for that. So that work does need to be supported also after approval. So I think it's very important. The experience, yeah, you ask everybody who tried psychedelics and they'll say, yeah, it was really, really important. Fine. But if you ask everybody who has tried microdosing, they'll say the same. And when we study that, it's looks like it's very driven by placebo. So the experience could be a side phenomena. I think it's beautiful. I don't believe it. I think it is important, but it's difficult to actually be certain about. So yeah, it's more, I think maybe a bit more an academic question, but if people could get help from without the complications of this experience and the challenges, it could also carry value. So it's fair enough and meaningful to study the non-psychedelic psychedelics. And that brings us over to the challenging versus peak experience. It's a bit of an arbitrary distinction, also because if it's a 5-6 hour sessions, you might have both in it can, and also you have, it's all dimensional. You can have a little bit challenge. You can also have extreme horror for the whole session that actually is never resolved. That's gonna be complicated to work with afterwards in integration. That's relatively rare. So it's all depending on the level and also what actually happens, the development of the actual sessions. That's why we developed, again, Leo Roseman emotional breakthrough inventory that's used in a lot of trials, was actually to tap into that breaking through and actually coming through. And that also speaks to the challenging experience. Therapy in general also have a lot of challenges. It's fair enough that there are challenges. It can also be therapeutic when the therapeutic context and the work around it is sufficient.
Yeah, let's maybe carry on afterwards, because I'd like to invite Theo to respond to the many questions, maybe not go too much into the details. People can come and talk to you. I hope you have your business cards ready to distribute to everyone.
Thank you. And just really the background behind the initiative and why we decided to come to the EU, as Francesca said, is that we believe that it's better and more efficient to build common standards and bring experience from the different countries than rather having some countries advancing like the Netherlands, Czech Republic or Portugal, and having in the end only some EU citizens having access. Because where I come from, France, it's getting a bit harder to discuss psychedelics at the national level. So it's the EU as a strength by recognizing it. And it's amazing that today we also have 2 MEPs supporting this initiative and supporting this cause. because this also brings a strong message for member states. About our strategy, we have different national teams across the EU. This event is also a way of bringing this topic, more into the mainstream media and public. But otherwise, we have people working in different countries. We have representatives from Estonia, Ireland, Italy here. So we got Anarita from Italy. So if you want to get in contact afterwards. But yeah, so the idea is to show the support of civil society, so politician side, but also artistic side, psychiatrist side, psychologist, scientist side. So to show that civil society is ready for this psychedelic-assisted therapies and calling officially the European regulators to follow that.
Thank you, Theo, and thank you to all panelists. Madam Chair and all the co-host, I'm happy to relinquish my role as moderator and hand it over to you for the conclusion of today's event.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very interesting discussion. I have to say I learned a lot on this, and I'm glad that we are having this kind of discussions here in the Parliament about something that can really be groundbreaking, something that can really be new. Of course, there's still a lot of data, a lot of information that we still have to gather. This is why research is important, why conducting studies and clinical trials are important, and I think that EU can play a role. So what I mentioned in the beginning was about the regulatory framework, so strengthening and incentivizing research. But of course, what I forgot to mention in the beginning was also the EU funding, direct funding for research through Horizon and other programs that was mentioned here. So I think EU can definitely play a role, and I'm glad that we'll be able to also promote this in the European Parliament. Thanks.
Yes, if I may, very shortly, I know we are over time, also say a few words as a conclusion. First of all, I would like to thank you, everybody. I think we had a lot of diversity here in this room, and I really appreciate it. I noted down so many inputs that you made also to your questions, but also to the experts here around the tables. A big thank you. But then also for Andrea, I found it always great when people come with their personal testimony, and it's really appreciated. So especially a big thank also to Andrea. And then of course to Theo, who made this great initiative for this European Citizens Initiative. And I have learned a lot. And my main question, I must say, in my head that goes around all the time, we need a reclassification of the psychedelics. Why are they still in this Schedule 1 as useless, as dangerous, and they bring so much, and we heard it today. So I learned also how psychedelic, that's something I take away, could also, it's really tackling so many things. It's tackling the need of our approach as European, also of decolonialization. We are still in the spirit, and you see some over the Atlantic are more again in the spirit of colonialization. And this, I think the psychedelic also brought me to think, yeah, we need to definitely change our attitude by giving lessons, but also more learning by other. I must say, honestly, as former chair, just a small bracket of Central America, the first permaculture I've seen was in Central America, not in Europe. So it's also a lesson of being more humble, of maybe even peace making. But then also I found the question interesting, should it be more national or a European approach? Of course, where I'm sitting, I say the step forward is through a European definitely approach where we need to harmonize the standards. And there was also the question from Estonia, do we need new legislation or how I understood it, the first question from Estonia, a more legal framework? And I think, yes, definitely on the EU level. And then also I really appreciate putting in a context what you mentioned. Why are we still having this taboo and this prejudgment on psychedelic, as we know now, and it was clearly shown in one slide that alcohol is much more dangerous. So a lot of things I wrote down. Also, I'm questioning, you see, you put a lot of input into me, as it is quite a cheap treatment. 1 to 3 trips can really help you. how, on the other hand, are we going to motivate also the industry in that direction? So there, for me, public authorities have also their role to play in order to push psychedelic, because it's not the big money you are going to make out of it, but it's a huge help for a lot of people that we can do. And I think public authority, for me in general, but it's specifically to psychedelics, need to play a more important role also in manufacturing, maybe part of the upcoming, I hope, psychedelic that really can help treatments, but I would even say society. So thank you very much for all the work that has been done, and thank you to all of you also online. Really appreciate it that you have been there, and for all your very constructive input. Thank you very much.